Get started. Thank you everybody for joining. I imagine we'll continue to have a couple folks join as we get started. Wanted to say thank you. My name is Katrina Holland. My name is Katrina Holland. I'm Executive Director of JOIN, which is a homeless services agency in the city of Portland, sort of the metro area. I've also been convening the Reimagine Oregon project since June. As we well know, Portland has spent just over 60 days now protesting racial injustice in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. They were agitated by federal agents arriving in our city just over the last week or so. But today we're here to announce the launch of a collaborative project started by Black-led organizations and Black community members and activists, as well as protest organizers dubbed the Reimagine Oregon project. This project began about 6 weeks ago, and today we'd like to share a little bit more about that project, the process, and coming next steps. So we'll have a few words from the project organizers to kick off our meeting, and then we will review some of the policy proposals that came from the jurisdictions that participated. You can find out who those jurisdictions are at our website, www.reimagineoregon.org. And then we will turn to questions from the press. So please note that this can be found live streaming on Facebook on JOIN's Facebook page. So feel free to search for that, jump on board, and we'll get started. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kali Thorne-Ladd.
Good morning, everyone. So it is good to see you today. We are in a moment in time that should make all of us pause and take notice. The oppression of Black people, and really any people, has focused on taking away our humanity, a devaluation of our worth. And this was true from the founding of this country, and it remains true today. And this is what we protest for. And it's no surprise that the federal government is using dehumanizing tactics even now to quiet our protest. The late and great John Lewis also marched in peaceful protest for our civil rights and had his head bashed in with a club. Tear gas, batons, troops. The scenes of racism at work here are all too familiar and all too recent. Let us not have the violence of federal troopers today and their bullying actions blind us, though, to the purpose and power of protest coupled with decisive action. And that is what brings us all here today. Decisive action. We are here for reimagining. We are here to breathe humanity into lives for too long that have been deemed dispensable. We are reimagining what the valuation of Black lives looks like for Oregon. Oregon, this is your chance. Now is your chance to prove that Black lives matter in a tangible and an actionable way. We are bringing solutions and policy changes that will yield long-term outcomes for Black people. Policy changes and proposals that address issues of education and ending the school to prison pipeline, healthcare and the injustices that impact not just our quality of life, but our lifespan. Economic development and the extraction of wealth from our community that deepens inequality generation after generation. The ongoing barriers to employment and home ownership. The carceral system that claims the lives of 3 to 6 times more Black men and women than anyone else. The list goes on and on. Black lives matter. The policies and practices that have destroyed our humanity or rendered us invisible can exist no more. They can be tolerated no more. And so we here today believe we can do better. We, meaning all of you, Oregon. And this is a critical step in the right direction. Today, we have a tangible opportunity to let go of the lethal doses of racism that have poisoned our past and blaze a new trail predicated upon seeing our humanity and strengthening the crooked line towards justice so that we all can thrive. So let this be a marker, let this be history in the making, and if we do it right, our children will look back and say, this was the year that Black lives started to matter here in Oregon. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Kali. Such powerful words. It's been a journey, to say the least. About over a month ago, Black voices, strengthened and given power by the feet in the streets, have been engaging with multiple levels of government, from the federal government, state, metro jurisdictions, multiple counties, as well as the city of Portland, to demand an ongoing systems level response to the calls from protests, to center Black humanity, to divest power and money from the police and carceral institutions that have made so many of us unsafe, and that Oregon should target investments of power and money and community capacity, that lawmakers need to not just say that Black lives matter, but use the lawmaking power they hold to actively and continually demonstrate that Black lives matter. So drawing on the demands of our Black-centered and Black-led institutions that have for years, if we want to be honest, for decades, been bringing strategies to dismantle systemic racism, we brought these proposals back and said, now that you finally realize Black lives matter, are you ready to do these things? Now that you have some political will, drive, some attention toward Black lives, on what timeline are you ready to get these things done? Because systemic racism has to be dismantled in our lifetimes. Our children do not need to inherit the social ills that we face. No more acknowledging Black people's pain and systemic racism, no more apologizing only. We formed this space so that we can get to fixing and co-creating a reimagined Oregon that is safe for Black people and a place where we can thrive. We've been making recommendations after recommendations for years. Reports and policy platforms like the State of Black Oregon, Portland African American Leadership Forums, Portland People's Plan, laid the blueprints that Oregon could have taken. And again, Feet in the Streets created the opportunity to bring these back to bear and also dream bigger, since a new moment of possibility has arrived, seeing the way other jurisdictions were responding to folks around the nation. So over a period of 6 weeks, we asked elected leaders from federal, state, regional, county, and city governments one simple question. What timeline do you commit to finally getting this stuff done? And who in your jurisdiction will lead it to the finish line? We structured the conversations in terms of divesting and investing. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Nikenge, who's going to talk a little bit about the executive branch and the state of Oregon.
Thank you, Katrina. Good morning, all. I'm using multiple devices this morning to convey some messages for you. I'm delighted to see you all here, so thank you for taking the time. We have made it a point to make sure that we were working across jurisdictions and at various levels of government. As a longtime former staffer, as someone who's worked in campaigns in the past, I can tell you that it's the first time that I've ever worked in a room like this, where we had folks, so the governor and the speaker and mayors and county chairs from across the region. It's a very different approach to the way that I've done policy in the past, and I'm delighted to share some of that with you this morning. So here are some highlights, and I want to be clear with you that we're giving highlights because the work is voluminous. Over the coming weeks and months, we'll have more time to dive into other areas of the work, certainly, but this morning we want to give you some top level highlights. So let's see. Earlier this summer, the governor called a special session to take action on police reforms. If you've been following the news, you will have noticed that the legislature worked on banning chokeholds, banning breathing restrictions. That work is better, but not quite done. So we have it in our almost done category. The legislature created the duty to report and the duty to intervene for law enforcement officers. In other words, we saw what happened to Mr. Floyd, and we saw how many police officers stood around and watched while he was murdered. In Oregon, that would no longer be lawful. It's hard for me to say that, right? Because it would still be terribly immoral, but it also would be unlawful at long last. Disclosing disciplinary records to the public, that's House Bill 4207. a new bill that our legislature passed into law during the special session, so that we can know which officers have had issues in the past, and they can't simply hop from Oregon jurisdiction to Oregon jurisdiction undiscovered. Prohibiting arbitration from lessening disciplinary action. That was Senate Bill 1604. Those of you, again, who've been following these issues for years, as has this group, know that often officers, even when officers are disciplined in those cases, often arbitration will overturn those decisions. So nothing, in fact, happens to hold officers accountable for bad behavior. Senate Bill 1604 seeks to make that different. So those are some things that are done or nearly done in the state of Oregon. There's some other things that are likely to happen, and we'll talk about when they're likely to happen as well. You'll recall that Katrina said we asked for specifics because for years we have heard, oh yes, these issues are very important to all of us, and we'll get to them. For this work, we wanted specific time frames when things were going to happen and when they were likely to happen so that we can hold lawmakers accountable. In the likely to happen category, for the next special session, and we think that there is likely to be one this summer or early fall. We'll have to see how that shakes out. But demilitarizing the police, banning the use of tear gas, banning the use of sound cannons that we've heard regularly in the streets of Portland, banning the use of flashbang grenades or pepper spray against any person. Right now, that's Legislative Concept 72. And if you're paying attention to what's happening in downtown Portland, you'll know how important it is to ban the use of tear gas, how important it would be to ban the use of sound cannons. I think just today, it was reported that a case that had been filed against the city of Portland by someone who lives in downtown Portland because tear gas had been seeping into her apartment, causing her health to be harmed. It's not just about people who are protesting, it's about homeless people. It's about people who live in the communities where tear gas is being used. So that's an important LC that we look forward to seeing proceed. Likely to happen in legislative session 2021, decriminalization of fare evasion by removing it as a misdemeanor. Prohibiting the use of fare evasion as a means for a warrant search. Feel free to do some research on that issue, but you'll find that law enforcement encounters Black and brown people very often through the pretext of investigating fare evasions, and then uses it to continue the engagement. Also likely to happen legislative session 2021, use of a task force the governor has created a task force that will deliver a bill in 2021 that will help us to further reform law enforcement in our state. And I don't know if the governor's going to talk about that this morning, but it's important work that has just begun. I don't want to put you on the spot, Governor. I know that you don't have a lot of time this morning, so there'll be plenty of time for us to talk about that in further detail. Also in 2021, we will revisit legislation that Senator Winters previously put forward. And that was about legalized slavery in the Constitution of our state. Imagine, it's still there. Some other issues that are top level and I want to highlight from our state legislature and from our executive branch have to do with investments. One of the things that's well on its way, and I want to check the box and say that it's done, invest in culturally specific mental health care healing centers and support centers like the Avo Gordley Center for Healing, with significant funding from public health agencies and at the city and state levels. It's tremendously important because when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we mean complete and whole persons, not merely to do with the police, not only to do with education, not only to do with jobs, but whole beings. Likely to happen in the next 30 to 90 days, establishing community-led work group that will reimagine community safety alternatives. Policy proposals will be deliberated for 2020 and 2021 and beyond. I think we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but there's a funding ask around that policy proposal because y'all, while we talk about the need to defund the police and how to build a real community public safety system in our communities, all of us have lived and grown up in this system. It's hard to imagine what our lives could be like under true public safety. So it's going to take some time, it's going to take some engagement, and it's going to take some dollars. So I know that there's also a funding ask of $2.5 million to support that work. The state legislature and the emergency board has allocated $62 million of incoming federal assistance for the Black COVID Relief and Resiliency Fund. While it has not yet been funded, the dollars have been allocated, and we look forward to that being done any day now, and that will further establish a culturally specific relief fund for African Americans in our state who have been hard hit by this pandemic and have been underserved by our state and our counties. I'm going to move on to some long-term planning for legislative session 2021. And y'all, I tend to speak quickly, so if it feels like I'm speaking slowly, that's because I'm trying to speak slowly. It's hard in the Zoom format. Long-term planning for legislative session 2021. We're looking for funding for culturally appropriate maternal health programs, Black community health workers and doula programs that are critical to Black wellness. These programs should include pregnancy, health, and prenatal care, birthing assistance and family supports for new parents, learning to care for their new infants. We're also looking for investments in stronger fair housing testing. Some years ago, our state gave up on fair housing testing and recently has reinvigorated it. We need far more dollars in investment and infrastructure surrounding that so that Oregonians can be protected against fair housing violations. And that work falls under BOLI. There are other highlights that I would love to share because it's exciting work that the Urban League is working on, that our partners are working on. But right now, I want to hand things over to Governor Brown, who's going to say a few words about the work that the state has been engaged in thus far and what we can expect from the state next. Governor Brown?
Great. Thank you, Nikenge. Appreciate everyone being here this morning. And I'm going to talk about process as opposed to policies this morning. It's been incredibly important for me to participate in this process, that my office be at this table so that we can all work together to forge a better path forward. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I certainly count myself as one of the many white politicians whose good intentions haven't done enough to tackle the scourge of systemic racism. Certainly, we passed juvenile justice reforms last year, but it took too many years for us to get it done, and we must go further. Yes, we are engaged in justice reinvestment to reduce harsh prison sentences and reinvest the savings in crime prevention and drug treatment, but we are truly only scratching the surface. And we are sitting here today amidst a global pandemic that has sickened and killed Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, and other communities of color at disproportionate rates. Racism and these racial disparities impact every part of our culture and our economy, and the pandemic has further exacerbated these disparities. We need to change how we listen to, engage with, respond to, and support Black, Indigenous, and people of color and tribal members here in the state of Oregon. That means a lot more listening and a lot more learning. And for me, it means centering racial equity as I build the state budget, centering racial equity as we develop our 2021 legislative agenda, as we recruit and promote people in state agencies and our boards and commissions. Very excited to partner with the community leaders on this call to cultivate a new narrative for Oregon and truly co-create a better future for Oregon, for everyone together. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Brown. Thank you, Nikenge. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Marcus C. Mundy, Executive Director of Coalition of Communities of Color, to introduce our Metro Regional Government proposals.
Very well, thank you. Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Governor. Yes, actually, it's good to see all these beautiful Black faces arrayed before me and all the beautiful elected faces and all the beautiful citizenry that decided to join this call. Thank you all. My name is Marcus Mundy. I am the Executive Director of the Coalition of Communities of Color. And I'm here to talk about Metro's regional government highlights as part of this process. As Katrina described earlier, everybody who participated, they participated at their own level. They made commitments about what they would do and what they could do and what they were likely to do. And I'm just going to share a few of those bullets before I introduce my good friend, Deputy President Juan Carlos Gonzalez. So the things that occurred to me, a couple of things have already been said that are likely to happen. Metro 2 has a duty to intervene protocol to stop excessive force. and decriminalization of fare evasion. I think those are important. Also on their likely to happen list was racial impact statements from sponsors of legislative bills. And people who don't know about this is important, because when you sponsor a bill, you always have a financial impact statement. You frequently have environmental impact statements, but it is critical that you start including racial impact statements so you can know who you are affecting with your proposed legislation. And they have some good processes at Metro meant to suss that out, define it, send it back if it doesn't meet the racial equity thresholds that they've set, and move on. So I think that's important that they've committed to do that. There's some smaller pieces there, like decriminalizing the fare evasion or increasing access to free fares. But there's also bigger pieces like alternative community safety methods that since Metro has decided to get rid of its transit police in some form or fashion, that will matter, the alternative methods to protect the community. And, you know, one of the things that is likely to happen is the continuation of their homelessness and permanent supportive housing, PSH related services that were confluent with their passage of Measure 26-210. So that's the things that they're likely to do. And even if they're likely to do it, we in the community must be relentless as we support them, but also require them to do what they say they're going to do. And again, the Metro Commission has been very, very excellent in that. Just a couple of things that they've committed to that will happen. And one thing that's close to my heart, jobs. They're committed to funding, using community-based organizations, a Black Worker Center. And I think it's going to be focused in Gresham, but I will ask the counselor to speak on that. And they're doing it through their Metro Equitable Grant process, which itself is a good process, but they've committed funding for that. They've also committed to, between Metro, TriMet, and PBOT, assemblage of a transit justice task force made of BIPOC communities responsible for analyzing data on transit access and developing solutions for equitable access. There's no more important time for this task force to take place, because for too long, communities of color, and specifically Black communities, have been disenfranchised from having access to jobs because they don't have access to good transportation. So with that, there is more that you can review in the details in these plans, but I would simply like to invite my good friend and colleague, who I worked with on transportation issues, T2020, homeless measure 26-210, and other areas critical for the advancement of Black people in our region, Metro Deputy President Juan Carlos Gonzalez. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Really nice to see everyone. Everyone for joining, for organizing this space to speak. And of course, I'm very honored to be able to share some insights, some thoughts on what the council has been working on, and of course, our staff at Metro. I'd like to start off by sharing that Metro has had a commitment to advancing racial equity for a few years now, and we've pushed for many different things throughout those years. We pushed for increased access for people of color in the trades. We focus on increasing capacity for community organizations to do sincere engagement, sincere empowerment of community members. We've developed a regional affordable housing bond measure, or a regional parks and natural areas bond measure, and of course, as Marcus mentioned, a supportive housing measure. And these have all been centered on racial equity. We've been focused and centered on equity for some time. But since the onset of COVID-19 and of course the killing of George Floyd, there is a fire that is palpable, a passion at Metro, both on the council and the staff and our leadership, to address our impact on Black and brown lives in Greater Portland, unlike ever before. And this process with Reimagining Oregon and evaluating what our role is specifically, we've had the opportunity to dive deeper, to make those commitments. And I know that these conversations are just the beginning of work that needs to happen soon and needs to happen now. As Marcus mentioned, we are planning to launch a regional transit justice task force this fall, working with multiple partners to address some of the biggest issues that have been brought up throughout our conversations, including policing, fare evasion, fares, and most importantly, really looking at how we can continue to expand access to transit for people across the greater region. We focused a lot on transportation issues, as Marcus has mentioned. The council referred a significant transformational measure to the ballot for this November. And in this measure, like in all of our work, there's a deep commitment to anti-displacement, to investing in workers, in businesses, and of course in the future of our region, really centered in racial equity. I also want to highlight that further investments that we're making, as was mentioned, as a part of our 2040 grant program. We've designed a grant program to really center projects designed around projects like PAALF's Black Worker Center in Gresham, and many others throughout the region that really focus on BIPOC communities. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our construction career pathway program that will really help us not only build a pipeline of workers, tens of thousands of good living wage jobs in the region, but create really intentional policies that dismantle systemic racism in our trades and in our construction industry, while creating a lot of opportunities for our BIPOC families and individuals to grow. And I'll wrap it up real quick by just saying that this process has helped us create new and reinvigorated our efforts for ongoing conversations that will be simultaneous with Black Lives Matter and now and into the future. You know, and as we look forward, we want to re-examine all of our relationships, all of our touch points with police and with other organizations that have an impact on safety and security. We have employee-led processes to help us expand this. And of course, I as a counselor and my peers, we're really committed. And although we listed a few things, ultimately, again, we just want to thank you. Marcus, thank you for introducing us. There is so much more work that we can do, that we are doing. But I'll wrap it up with those things that have really been the center of our work.
Thank you, Councilman Carlos Gonzalez. It's been a pleasure working with you through this process. I'm definitely looking forward to continued work ahead. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Ruby Houghton, who's going to share a little bit about Multnomah County, and then she will hand it off to Chair Deborah Kafori.
Thank you, Katrina, and fellow speakers. I'm Ruby Houghton Pitts. I'm the State Director of AARP here in Oregon, 510,000 members, thousands of volunteers, and we advocate on people 50 plus and their families, so this is our niche. With Multnomah County, we proposed a myriad of proposals who actively engaged with multiple commissioners from Multnomah County and the board. I'll be highlighting just a few of the key important pieces of that work that Multnomah County has committed to. The county also committed to being accountable to affirm further fair housing, ending racial segregation in both public and private housing markets, providing community development without displacement, as called out in the State of Black Oregon, and that was in 2015. The bottom line is we know that housing discrimination runs rampant in both the public and the private market. Multnomah County has committed to investing in robust testing mechanisms that works to identify where discrimination in housing access is an issue and works to increase enforcement. Multnomah County has also committed to expanding investment in African American Black culturally specific programs, including housing stabilization and treatment that deflect the diverse and divergent individuals from the criminal justice system and the wraparound services that support youth who engage in the criminal justice system. This has been targeted for both this year's budget in 2020 and 2021 and fiscal year 2021 and 2022 budget cycles. So look, in the next 30 days, we can expect Multnomah County to close down one of 3 jail dorms and to add $1.2 to $3.6 million. I'm going to hand it off right now to Multnomah County Chair Deborah Kafori, who is a friend of mine, who will share a little bit more about what Multnomah County participated in and why they participated in this process. Chair Kafori.
Thank you, Ruby. It's good to see you. It's good to see all of your faces today. Good morning. I'm Deborah Kafori. I'm your Multnomah County Chair, and I'm also here representing the other members of the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. We are all deeply committed to this work. The breadth of jurisdictions and stakeholders, the depth of commitment, and this level of coordination to dismantle systemic racism and build the community that we need, these calls have been unlike anything we've ever experienced. They've been both a place of accountability and they've been a place of hope. And in light of the federal government's outright hostility towards changing harmful systems, these conversations and these commitments are even more necessary. Because at its core, this is the work that we are called to do. It's not an addition, it's not a special initiative, nor is it a one-time investment. We are taking meaningful, tangible steps that ensure our systems, whether it's justice, housing, education, or healthcare, acknowledge the full humanity of Black people, and that we, in partnership, develop policies and programs that move us towards true transformation. It is most important that we use this moment and this momentum to make real, lasting change that we all know is long overdue. We can go faster and we can go farther and we can do more, and we will, in a variety of ways. In our budget, where we spend dollars that reflect our values. In this year's budget, we began this work by putting more dollars into prevention, more dollars into programs that help community avoid interacting with our justice system at all. It's how we partner with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office and the District Attorney. It is how we act and respond as the home of the COVID-19 response. And it's in the way that the critical wraparound services that our community depends on are focused on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I am so grateful for the leadership of the individuals who brought us together over the past 6 weeks. I know that for you all, this work is both professional and deeply personal. Katrina, Nkenge, Khalid, Jesse, Lamar, Marcus, and so many other leaders brought together a wide range of community voices and views, encouraged us to rethink what's possible, and reminded us of the magnitude of this moment in history. I know that this group of community leaders will keep every jurisdiction accountable to the commitments that we're making today, and I know that they'll keep pushing for what is right and for what is good for our community. And in turn, we'll listen, we'll act, and we'll keep pushing forward towards real, meaningful change together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Kafori, and thank you for participating in this process as well. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Lamar Wise, who has been on the front lines organizing some of the early protests on the wake of George Floyd's murder. And he will talk about the Washington County highlights and then hand it over to Chair Catherine Harrington. Lamar?
Yeah, thank you so much, Katrina. So there are a variety of things that Washington County has already started to do and has already started to think about, but also want to highlight, before I actually pass it off to the chair, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that some of us are excited about continuing to discuss and pursue, which is ensuring that all personnel at the Sheriff's Office are complying with the sanctuary ordinances that we would have concerning ICE. We want to ensure that we are combating any coordination that we have with ICE and ensuring that we have a safe community here in Washington County. In addition to that, duty to intervene protocols to stop excessive use of force is also something that folks have flagged as something that's crucial and important for us to do in Washington County. So those are a couple of highlights. There are more on our website, but also just wanted to see time for Chair Harrington to talk about what's happening in Washington County and to give any other exciting updates that we have going on.
Thank you, Lamar. The convenings over the past 6 weeks have provided a unique opportunity for myself and Commissioner Pam Treese to hear from leaders of the Black community and partner jurisdictions about the important work being done to combat racism. In late February, Washington County passed our first ever equity resolution, and as a board committed to funding 5 new positions to begin to support a centralized effort. We are in the process of hiring our first ever Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer and are committed to addressing structural and institutional racism head on. Earlier this summer, we announced another first for Washington County. Throughout August, we will be hosting 6 community-centered, culturally specific listening sessions. These grew out of a budget proposal I'd put forward in June to fully fund the deployment of body-worn cameras in the Sheriff's Patrol Division. Within 24 hours, I heard loud and clear that not everyone in our Black and Brown communities is comfortable with this law enforcement tool. In the spirit of nothing for us without us, the board agreed to put the deployment decision on hold and to hear directly from the community about what they need to feel safe. We are inviting the public to come and share with us community needs, fears, and frustrations. We understand that the use of body-worn cameras is part of a much larger conversation about racial injustice and law enforcement reform that is happening right now all around the nation. As an agency, we continue to work to ensure we are centering the needs of our community in our decision-making. Commissioner Treese has been a great partner and ally in this work. I continue to look forward to doing this work together, to bringing our board along, and to continue to build our relationships with BIPOC leaders from throughout the region. Thank you again to the Black leaders who sponsored these meetings, pulled us all together, informed us, joined these meetings, and shared their insights and provided direction. I'll be sure to have my staff share the information about the community listening sessions, including how to sign up. Thank you again for including Washington County in this vital work.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, and thank you as well for participating in the process, you and your colleagues. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Clackamas County commitments that we engaged them on during this process, and then I will hand it over to Commissioner Sonia Fisher, who was a critical piece of this work. So one of the things that we discussed with Clackamas County is sort of investigating and defunding Clackamas County Sheriff's Office. And one of the things that was highlighted during this process was the fact that once funds go from the county to the Sheriff's Office, it's pretty much hands off. So Clackamas County challenged the state legislature to say, hey, is this something that you can deal with? And sort of look at legislative changes that will allow us to be able to engage deeper with our Sheriff's Office and have a little bit more control of the budget. And in that process, it seemed like there was a almost commitment in that space. And we did hear from Clackamas County that they will be working with the state legislature in the 2021 upcoming session to talk about what that looks like. They also committed within the next 30 to 90 days to require racial impact statements, something that Marcus was discussing a little earlier, from folks who are bringing ordinances to Clackamas County Board in order to analyze potential impacts to BIPOC communities. They also committed to consulting with community-based organizations or experts for input on how to make things better if it is discovered during that process that whatever policy or ordinance they're attempting to move forward is going to have a negative impact. Part of this commitment was making sure that they would require a rewrite in consultation with BIPOC communities of any policy, again, that indicates negative impacts or that could exacerbate racial disparities. And this was really important. This has been something that has been requested for many, many years and seemed like it wasn't getting much traction. But during this process, we finally got some of those commitments. Also in their likely to happen category, they committed to contributing to the $2.5 million fund that Nikenge talked about in rethinking community alternatives to safety in Clackamas County. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Commissioner Sonia Fisher for more details on what Clackamas County committed to by subject area. You can find that on our website, reimagineoregon.org. Commissioner?
Thank you, Katrina. I just want to thank everyone, and especially our Black leaders that convened us at a time where I think I can speak for all of us. We really wanted the focus. We were all hearing loud and clear from the protesters how important Black lives are, how critical Black lives are, and that once we focus our energies on the importance of Black lives, then our whole community benefits. So I want to say first, Clackamas County has been committed. We continue to be committed. We passed a resolution denouncing racism. We have an equity office that's being established. We have engaged the Coalition of Communities of Color to fully assess Clackamas County, similar to what Washington County recently did. But beyond that, I want to focus on the specifics of this effort, of this convening here as to what our immediate commitments are. So first, we are investing in culturally specific mental health services. We are also funding culturally specific maternal health programs that are critical to Black wellness. We are updating our fair housing plan with an anti-racist framework to end racial segregation. We are creating housing supports that expand service networks. And this for Clackamas County is huge because we need culturally specific services through our housing networks, and we are doing that. We are collaborating, and I want to say effectively collaborating with our sheriff's office for community alternative safety methods. In Clackamas County, we fully understand the importance of Black lives. And we are committed to continuing this dialogue for social justice. Similar to what Chair Harrington said, we are also engaging in community dialogue. It's really listening. It's the value of listening to our community, to each other, that we're able to move these issues forward. We are doing that in Clackamas County, and I must say I'm so proud that we are doing that as a region and we are doing that as a state. So thank you to everyone for all of the participation and pushing us, giving us the win to really do what's right.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Lamar, who's going to talk about the city of Portland.
Thank you. Yeah, so I want to take this moment to highlight that the protests started a couple months ago, and when that was happening, there was a bunch of tear gas, there was a bunch of pepper spray, impact munitions, right? This is something that has continued, and this is something that we will continue to work on with the city in terms of banning tear gas, banning the use of flashbang grenades. For the folks that have been doing peaceful protests on the ground and continue to protest, folks have been targeted legal observers have been targeted, press has been targeted, and to ensure that that stops, we're going to need to work with City Council, especially Mayor Ted Wheeler, to ensure that that we have policies in place that stop that and continue to uplift First Amendment rights when it comes to protests. And so I just wanted to highlight that, you know, even though that we have federal agents here and that that there's a spotlight on that, the city of Portland and the Portland Police Bureau also still have that responsibility to ensure the safety of the folks that are protesting, and to continue to actually listen to what the needs are on the ground. So I just wanted to highlight that. And yeah, I'll give it back to you, Katrina.
Thank you so much, Lamar. We're getting ready to close here. I wanted to hand it over to an amazing organizer, Ilona Wilson, to do our call to community action. One of the things that we kept telling elected officials over and over and over again, I'm pretty sure they're tired of hearing it, is this is the very beginning of this work. There is a lot of work to do. It took 400 years to get to this space, or as my colleague Marcus Mundy says, over 20,000 weeks. So 6 weeks is not enough to make sure that we've gotten this thing down. There's a lot of work that needs to continue to go in this, and that's why we called it the Reimagine Oregon Project. We imagine this work to continue to go on, and we imagine that this work will continue to update what the policy proposals are that come out of process. It's an iterative process, is what we kept saying over and over. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ilona Wilson for our closing remarks.
Thank you, Katrina. Like she said, my name is Ilona Wilson, and I'm a community organizer for Stand for Children, and also a native Oregonian and Portlander, and someone that is out getting the community now together, right? Because we know that the Black community needs to be unified. And excuse my puppies in the background. They are very excited to go outside after this. So thank you so much for sticking around with us. So the bottom line is, throughout our history, as a state, brave Oregonians have joined together across race and place and taken to the streets and ballot boxes, risking their lives and their livelihoods. And throughout our history, the powers that be have found ways to divide us by casting doubts or sowing fears about our protests, our movements for a better state and country. Whether we're marching in the streets or sending letters and making phone calls to our elected officials, we're coming together to demand more than moderate or incremental change. We are demanding a state and a country to make good on its promise of liberation and justice for all. And for our elected officials and public servants to do what it takes to make that promise real. This is a unique tool that demonstrates localities and local community drive for solutions. In the context of the national conversation, we believe it is time to drive the solutions and demand action, city by city, county by county. We're calling on community members in Portland, in Oregon, and across the country to begin engaging in your own dialogues with multiple levels of government. Sorry. Our experience has only affirmed what we know to be true. Sure, governments can act in silos, but they're more effective when they work together to accomplish things. The system is more than one person, more than one idea. They are people and must begin talking and planning for one another with community to begin dismantling systemic racism. For those in Portland who'd like to join this effort, please visit our website to sign up for updates, to get in contact with folks who can help plug you into these policy efforts and organizing opportunities. It's going to take all of us together. So you can visit reimagineoregon.org to sign up for those. We'll be sending out regular scheduled updates to keep folks updated on progress and to plug into our work. I'm going to pass it back to Katrina.
Thanks. So at this time, we will open it up to the press for questions and go from there.
And Katrina, how should the press ask questions? Should they raise their electronic hand?
Yeah, let's do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You'll have to forgive me. This is my first time hosting a Zoom press conference.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hey, this is Dirk Vanderhart at OPB. Really interesting stuff this morning. I just wanted to nail down a little bit of the background. So you all have said 6 weeks repeatedly. So are we saying in mid-June this really came together? And I'm very interested in how frequently people were meeting on this and how that was happening. Like, was it just sort of meetings all over the place, small meetings going on to secure these individual commitments, or just kind of take me through the process of how you all got this done in 6 weeks?
Absolutely. So I can say that early in June, it really started with a couple of phone calls. So several of us were watching press releases and press conferences with folks across the nation and here in Oregon. And it felt like we just kept hearing folks get stuck in this rut of acknowledging Black people's pain and apologizing for it. And we didn't really hear any action. So we started calling each other like, are you meeting with folks? Have you talked about protest demands? Have we talked about this? And we got together some Black-led organizations as well as organizers of the early protests and said, what do you think about this idea? Because we're sick and tired of hearing this, this rut. We need to get out of it and actually start doing something. And so we got together, figured out what process we wanted to do at that time. Because COVID was increasing quite a bit in the area, we decided to go Zoom conferences. And so we met pretty much every Friday since June 12th for 2 hours via Zoom with each level of government and the organizers for the Reimagine Oregon project. And we literally took policy proposals out of the People's Plan, the State of Black Oregon, Coalition of Communities of Colors, recommendations in several of their publications, PAALF and Unite Oregon's Defund, Reinvest, and Protect initiative, as well as some demands from individual Black community organizers, laid them out in a spreadsheet and added some columns that said timeline, elected official responsible, organizational lead, and any notes to help us complete this picture. And so between each Friday, elected officials were tasked with working with their individual agencies and staff to figure out how they could commit to certain timelines, identifying staff, and then updating that process, which is what we turned into the website reimagineoregon.org, the policy demands section. At the end of the process, about July, I want to say 10th maybe, we're meeting again on the 31st, we asked folks to detail a plan, as well as who in their offices we could, Black community members and folks could connect with to make sure that if there were any new policy proposals coming up, they could propose them. And for the policy proposals that weren't yet completed through this process, that they could connect with them to help make it happen. I think for us, it was really important to sort of open a space of transparency. Because oftentimes for some of us in this work, we make these policy proposals, put together these beautiful plans, and then it just goes into a black box. We don't know who's moving things forward, what levers need to be pulled or pushed unless you have political knowledge. And in a time like now where there are so many community members dedicated to this cause and to begin dismantling systemic racism in the many ways that it manifests itself, we really wanted to open that up so that elected officials know you're accountable to this. Community members can see the way that you're responding to these policy proposals and others, and you're going to have to hear from folks about it to the people that you've assigned in your office to move these forward. So that's what it looks like.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, go ahead, Marilyn. I'll go next.
Go ahead.
You're so polite. So we all get along. I concur with Dirk that that was a great answer to how you did this in 6 weeks. It's quite a process and quite a result. I'm wondering how we heard from elected officials about these concrete steps, and how do you though harness the energy that's out there from the people on the streets? How do you take that energy from the streets and get the support that you need for these concrete efforts for people to get behind them, to show up at council meetings virtual, or what, how do you get that energy from the streets to take this and run with it and help?
That's a good question, Tim. I'm going to hand it over to the organizers who were working in the protest. So Ilona was just out on Sunday night with folks at the protest down at the Justice Center. Maybe we can start with Lamar, though, who helped with early protests. Lamar, did you want to answer?
Actually, no, I'm going to pass it back. I'm going to give it to Ilona.
Okay, go for it.
All right. So yes, I've been out there and was out there last night and will be out there tonight. And the next steps, of course, are to ensure that this movement is intentional. So making sure that as we move forward, we have all of these demands that have been compiled and we are able to use these protests as a tactic alongside going to and speaking at and before lawmakers or sending letters. We are using this as a tactic for this movement, and we can't let it stop, right? We know that the Montgomery bus boycott lasted 382 days, right? So how long is it going to take for all of these demands from the Black communities to finally be met, right? And so if that answers your question, Tim. If not, you can ask a clarifying question. But
I actually have kind of follow up on Tim's question, and I don't know if you want to take it, Ilona, but is there some concern that these protests, with the violent part of the protest, the vandalism, the throwing things at police officers, and what happens next, is there some concern that that's diluting this message of Black Lives Matter? I know some African-American leaders have said that, and, you know, how do you feel about that?
yeah, no, totally. That was something that I was asked yesterday by actually some media folk. Yes, I do think that it is important for us to make something clear that we do not promote violence. We're not a part of unnecessary violence. And we do need to keep ourselves separate from that. Right, and so, one moment, sorry. We do have concerns about seeing things taken or broken, but there is no object on earth of the value of human life, right? Focusing in on things and not people as a distraction from what matters and a barrier to pursuing equal justice for all. Until we see and value Black people as equally worthy of respect as everyone else, people of good conscience should be outraged and should be out protesting with every single moment and every single breath that they take, right? Because equity is not a lens. And justice is not just one moment. It needs to be in every single moment. And yes, there does need to be unity. And that is why this, I suppose, group that has come together is just a collective, right? And so hopefully we're hoping to bring together the Black different organizations that have been downtown tonight to create that collective so that we're all on the same page and understand that if we use the right tactics, this will be the final movement that is ever needed to ensure that we are all equal. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that, Marilyn, and then I'll hand it over to Rachel. I'm sorry, Rachel. Thank you for your patience. So I think one of the things that we constantly sort of remind ourselves is the protest is nothing but a symptom. The violence is nothing but a symptom of a larger disease that's causing people to be, as Ilona said, outraged. For 400 years, there has been systemic oppression of people based on the color of their skin. It's ridiculous. And so, I mean, if we think back about the civil rights era, that also was something that was happening. There were people, a select group of small people who were outraged and chose to riot and set fires to things. And I think MLK said it best. Sure, maybe that's not necessarily the best way to move things forward, but it definitely got folks' attention. And it is the language of the unheard. I always encourage my colleagues to say, perhaps we should stop casting stones on the fact that people choose to set fire to a building or take a rock through a window, and acknowledge the pain that's behind that and acknowledge the root of what is causing that. And that is this systemic oppression. On our website, we go through detailing all of the ways in which Black lives have been shown not to matter. Education, socioeconomics, wealth, jobs, healthcare. The list goes on and on, as Colleen described earlier. And so I think it's important for us to turn our attention towards solutions. And I believe that as we move forward and as folks start seeing not just incremental change, but catalytic change, we'll begin to notice a shift.
I just want to say, I don't think people have the problem with Black Lives Matter at all, especially in Multnomah County, Oregon, which just voted in this progressive DA. I shouldn't say at all. But I think there's the perception that is these white young anarchists who are causing the violence, and that is what is diluting the message of Black Lives Matter. And, not that it's the people of color who are protesting who are diluting the message, but really, I think the impression is it's white anarchists or our Antifa who's doing that and somehow hurting the message that other people really want heard.
Marilyn, I appreciate the question. And Katrina, if you'll allow me to jump in for a second. Listen, I'm an anti-fascist. America fought a war against fascism. We've stood up against fascists around the world throughout our history. So I want to be real clear about that. Beyond that, Katrina's answer stands. What we're seeing too often in the media is folks concentrating on buildings and property that is well insured and invested in. What we're seeing too little of is the media talking about the reasons that people have to take to the streets in the first place. I'm a daughter of Oregon. I am an American, and yet I have to fight to be treated as an American. I am a lawyer, I am a businesswoman, I am a community volunteer, and yet I have to fight. I have to gather my governor, my county commissioners, my metro commissioners, anyone and everyone to bring them to the table in order to gain my full rights as a citizen. That is far more violent upon my life and upon the lives of Black people in this country and has been for 400 years. So you'll pardon me if I refuse to discuss graffiti on the side of buildings. You'll forgive me if I refuse to engage in discussions about plate glass windows, especially considering how often throughout our history, Black people, not just in other parts of the country, but here in our city and our state, have been harmed in violent ways because of the very systemic racism that we're seeking to address today. So while I appreciate the question so that we can address it, I'm really hoping that reporters here and who will be listening later and community members who are listening later will focus on the fact that this is about lives and the rights of people to be free. After I get free, I'll go scrub some graffiti. But for now, we're going to focus on policy. Can we take the next question, please?
Yeah, we're running out of time, so I do want to make sure to hand it over to Rachel and then Kirk.
Hi, so I cover housing a fair amount, as you know, Katrina, and I wanted to understand more about the demand that's in the press release, but I don't think I've heard anyone speak to, which is defunding the Multnomah County's homeless outreach and programs engagement team. What's the concern there, and why is that among your demands?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. Thank you, Rachel. So the HOPE program, while I think it was well-intentioned, bottom line, it is a policing tactic to engage with people who are homeless. And what we have seen is that the outcomes of that have resulted in criminalization of people for lack of resources. And it has resulted in a disproportionate effect of folks who have found themselves incarcerated because of engaging with the sheriff. We believe that there are community alternatives to safety for people who are on the streets. And in particular, this is very important for Black people because we are overrepresented in the most vulnerable of the homeless population, which is people who make between 0 to 30% AMI and have a disabling condition. It could be a mental health break. It could be you know, maybe somebody's stuff got stolen and they're just a little bit erratic at that time. I happen to work in the social services agency, and I can tell you that there are significantly better methods to engage with folks who are homeless, through social services, through case management, through regular ongoing engagement, building relationships with people. That's one of the signatures of Join. And so what we're hoping to accomplish with Multnomah County is to rethink that program, take it out of the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office because it doesn't belong with the police, and think about it, another way of engaging with our houseless neighbors. Kirk?
Kirk, you said your audio might not be working and we can't hear you right now. Kirk, if you want to put your question in the chat, we can read it from the chat and take it there. Katrina, do you want to take another question in the meantime?
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions?
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I don't, is the governor still on? Because it seems like some of the most immediate of these changes could be some of the legislative policing proposals and a special session. And I was wondering if I think Katrina maybe said, or maybe Nikenge said, you know, this summer or fall. I'd be far interested in some clarity on, you know, when we might see that session.
Yeah, so I believe the governor did have to take off. And in doing a little bit of research, I don't know if that has yet been resolved, but it could be resolved this week as to what date the special legislative session.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I see a question over in the chat, Katrina, from Tim. He says, my question was really about the mechanics of how you harness the energy of the protest to get boots on the ground in contacting legislators, joining community groups, doing voter drives, etc. Like literally, how does that work? Not meant to be a criticism of the protests themselves.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of got that going, but I just really, I think there's a real importance, I would hope you'd agree, in you know, protest, but also how you get the action that you need people to participate beyond the protests in, you know, census efforts and voter registration drives and other things. You go through a crowd and start a list, gather names of the wall of moms, and then you have them for later. I mean, I just literally interested in the mechanics of that and how that would work. How that could work.
I'm going to answer briefly, and then I'm gonna pause. It is this work that you see us doing and that you're hearing about is extra work. Kali Thorne-Ladd is executive director of K-Rose PDX, a school for children. This is not what she does for her bread and butter every day. It's extra work. And while I run a civil rights and social justice organization, I can assure you that during a pandemic, this is not what I was planning to be doing at this time. It is extra work. Katrina Holland runs Join. It is not a civil rights organization in the way that the Urban League is. And yet as a sister in this community, she knew the work was important. So it's extra work. By that, I mean, we're doing all of those things too. So the Urban League.
I appreciate that. I totally appreciate that.
Go ahead.
It's just that there's a lot of people out there and that energy's out there. And so how do you harness that?
No, and I want to be very clear. It is happening. And that's why I'm hoping the media will engage on that, because the census work, PAALF is still doing that work right now. Unite Oregon is still doing community organizing right now. Ignite in Washington County, they are absolutely doing voter registration, all those things right now, just as we always do. And protesters and folks who are at rallies are also engaging in that work. So while we're not talking about that in this room very much, please be very clear that all of those other things and types of organizing are also happening.
Yeah, Tim, I would say that the other thing I'd add to that is one of the things that we wanted to make sure was really important in this space was that we were bringing folks together. So I don't necessarily know if we can describe exactly how protesters are getting into a list and how we're emailing them. But what I can say is the organizers of these protests, like Lamar, like Ilana, like Danielle Barker, who is an artist and was part of organizing the early days of Rose City Justice. They had their own meetings for how they wanted to protest and move things forward. And so we constantly tried to create sort of like a feedback loop. Like, here's what happened in this meeting. Danielle was there to see it. She went back and told the protesters what was happening. And so we created sort of that loop on an ongoing basis. Granted, things happen. There's a new wave of protests. I think Ilana was trying to speak earlier that we're attempting to build that feedback loop again with this new group. And so, yeah, that's sort of what it looks like at this
Hello.
Thanks for all that. I appreciate it.
Real quick, I think this is the first time that we've seen this table really focus on action. Can you hear?
Okay, thanks. All I've got is, I mean, I guess.
Jeffrey, can you mute Marilyn?
I don't know yet. I'm sorry, I'm still listening.
That this is the first time that we've had a list of actionable items and policy changes that people can actually get behind and protest on. And so I think part of Alana, particularly being in both groups, it really helps focus some of the protests, and that's part of her vision, I believe, is helping the protests work in tandem with the policy movement so that we are working towards the change that we want to see in Oregon. And as Nkenge said, all of us run Black-led, all of us are Black leaders running organizations that are in the day-to-day of serving this community. And so coupled with that, we are doing the work, and that's why our voices are so important. And that I think the distraction of sort of white actors is a little frustrating sometimes, because there has been so much Black leadership during this time, and Black people stepping up to create change that is valuable and telling elected officials and others, you know, here's what you can do. And finally, we're at a place where I think people are ready to act. But it has been sort of the coupling of protesters being thoughtful and collaborating and working with us to be able to have a vision of what do we need to move forward, and then bringing electeds on board to make it happen. And I think there are many ways to still be engaged right now.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and move to Kirk. Kirk, thank you so much for your patience. Question is, I'm hearing a lot about all the work going on and collaborating locally and in the state, but as you well know, this is a national issue. And how do you really keep an eye on bigger changes when, say, for example, today as this presser is held, Attorney General Barr is testifying to Congress. What unfolds nightly around the courthouse cannot be reasonably called a protest. It is an assault on the government of the US. I guess, can you get all this work done locally? Is that the focus? You know, we talked about this a lot, actually. And I think one of the things that we have noticed in our federal government is they are not interested in engaging. They're not interested in sort of longer term solutions. Obviously, our federal delegation is, Senator Wyden joined one of these calls. We had some staff from Senator Merkley's office and Senator Wyden's office participating this entire time, but there are only 2 folks in the whole sea of Congress. And I think it's fair to say that the federal government's leadership is just lackluster right now. There's not a bunch of, folks are not interested in solutions. It's political, it's about Trump trying to get reelected and energizing his base that is really pushing these narratives that, you know, Black lives don't matter. You need to make sure that you're prioritizing the buildings. You need to make sure that if you're protesting, it needs to be done in this way. It needs to be approved. It needs to be peaceful, whatever peaceful means to them. And so I think we have no choice but to focus on cities and counties and states, because we're the ones that are providing leadership in this space. I mean, we saw that with COVID. Federal government did not agree to coming with a comprehensive plan. It was the governors and cities and counties who had to respond with what those are. And so I think we appreciate Oregon, multiple levels of Oregon's government being willing to engage in this process and being willing to move things forward in a concrete manner, hand in hand with communities. So that's what I'd say to that. I see Jeff Mapes, on your request for $2.5 million in funding, how much has been committed by government bodies so far? What are you asking for from the state, and what is the status of that? I'll go ahead and hand it over to Lamar.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So for sure, Metro has already started to talk about committing $50,000 for this year and $50,000 for next year. In addition, there's actually going to be a meeting for the Washington County Commission coming up in the next couple of weeks for us to continue to talk about what is possible for them, and I believe as well as for Clackamas in the next few weeks, I want to say. At this point, we are ensuring that everyone's questions are answered in terms of what our overall plans are and goals are. And so as we continue to answer those questions and ensure that people have the information that they need, we'll get more, our hope is that we get more of those commitments solidified. We are also engaging the state on this ask. And so I believe our hope at this point is in the next special session, we will ramp up the discussion around, what the budget looks like, but also how we can best use our dollars to support reimagining what safety looks like. And so this is an ongoing discussion and conversation, and we're starting to get into the nitty gritty as to like what each jurisdiction can do. But that is what I know thus far. And I'm, if there are updates from other jurisdictions that are on the call now, please go forth. But that's what I know at this point.
Okay. We have a question from Molly Harbarger. I hope I said your name right. I'm sorry if I didn't, Molly. How do you, as Reimagine Oregon, plan to hold jurisdictions accountable for their commitments? Yeah, thanks for that question. I will go ahead and hand it over to Ilana and Nikenge. Or Nikenge, you want to go first?
Actually, I was going to ask Chair Kafori if she would go first.
Okay, sure.
Chair Kafori, did you hear the question?
Can you repeat that question again? Thanks.
Sure. How do you, as Reimagine Oregon, plan to hold jurisdictions accountable for their commitments?
Well, I think that's one of the most amazing things about this group coming together. As I said in my comments, it's that we have specific policy actions and items, and that the commitment is there to hold, for this group to hold jurisdictions accountable throughout. So it's not just putting words or putting thoughts on paper. It's actually timelines and actions that we're going to move forward on. We have a timeline. I've actually had my staff already working on prioritizing when we think we can get items finished that have been brought up today. And I haven't asked Reimagine Oregon, but I'm assuming that we will have check-ins along the way to literally hold us to the items that we've been discussing and that we are so deeply committed to.
Thank you for that, Chair Kafori. Chair Harrington, would you like to speak to that question as well?
Certainly. As Lamar mentioned, in a couple of weeks, on Tuesday, August 11th, the Washington County Board of Commissioners will be further informed about the work of these Black leaders, as well as the proposal for Reimagining Oregon. And I expect us to have a robust discussion about how we can continue our investments and disinvestments, as you have seen or have the opportunity to see documented through the files that this group helped us pull together. We're also really pleased to have the opportunity to learn from our partner jurisdictions, from Metro, Multnomah County, Clackamas County, the power of together to do our part to make Oregon a better place for all of you, all of us, so that we can overcome the oppression that has been noted here several different times. As mentioned, it's a journey. I know I'm on this journey, Commissioner Treese is on this journey, and we need to ensure that our colleagues on the Washington County Board of Commissioners are equally on this journey. I would hope that we would invest in this effort through the question that Jeff Mapes asked about, but we have to do that as a full commission. Thank you again for being here today.
And Alana, did you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. And the question was, how will we hold electeds accountable? And that answer is in every way possible, right? And by any means necessary. So what that means essentially is that we need to be using all of the different tactics, both the ones that we talked about earlier, right? So we can write letters, we can give testimony, we need to be out on the streets. We do. We still do need to be out on the streets, but we need to be intentional about how we're doing these things. And we need to be educating people as we are doing these things. And so I do believe that those are the main ways that we are going to be keeping folks accountable, but as we know, things do change, but we do have a plan and we are going to get it done.
Thank you. So we're a little over time. Did folks have any final questions before we release and end this live stream? Okay, great. So as I put in the chat, you can find the complete press release on our website at www.reimagine.org/launch. That includes some information about the process, some quotes from folks who participated, a little bit about the specific asks. You can also find on that website what the specific policy proposals were that we brought to elected officials, what their response was in terms of whether it was going to happen, likely to happen, maybe in discussion, the timeline, and legislative leads who have been assigned to those particular policy proposals. For folks that are interested in plugging in with a local organization, feel free to also go to our website. On the About page, we have a sign up where you can list yourself as an individual, organization, community group, whichever your preference is. We are compiling that information so that we can send out ongoing updates. And for folks that just have general questions or media that would like to get in contact, you can also reach out to us on our website that is connected to an email address. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to the press for your detailed questions. Appreciate this, appreciate you pushing it out, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.
Thank you.